Hey, what's going on, guys? I thought I'd give you my quick thoughts on THQ Nordic's Biomutant. This is an open-world, post-apocalyptic action RPG made by Experiment 101, a new studio founded by one of the creative directors over at Avalanche Studios, makers of the Just Cause series and Mad Max. Now, Biomutant has been in development for some years now, constantly getting pushed back, and I've actually been looking forward to it. But now that it's out, is it any good? Well, yeah, it is, but I have some reservations, which we'll get into. Now, as I've mentioned, the game is an open-world action RPG. You start off by creating your character, who has a bit of amnesia, it seems. Throughout the game, you'll be fighting all kinds of weird creatures, exploring new areas, discovering your past and your role in the world, and making moral choices as you interact with the denizens of the world. The game utilizes a post-apocalyptic Earth setting, kinda similar to Darksiders, although instead of hell on Earth, it looks like nature has really taken over here. You're noticing by now the environments look gorgeous. Really beautiful. The game utilizes some tricks to get this working. There is some noticeable pop-in from time to time, and during combat, the area around you kind of blurs to keep the frame rate up. The performance isn't great, even on a system like mine. 1070 Ti, 5900X, 32 gigs of RAM, and the loading times aren't great either. No matter what settings I picked, the game could not stay above 60 for very long. It wasn't chugging like crazy, usually hovering above 45 frames, but just bear in mind your mileage may vary. It was playable for me, but it could be a hell of a lot better. Now, as for gameplay itself, it's fun, but more thematic and visual than mechanically deep. I think the developers were going for a John Woo gun-fu style here, where you would have melee combat with guns and tons of jumping and slow motion effects, and it works well enough. The guns handle like Ratchet and Clank in terms of control. There was another game that kind of went for this similar gameplay style of third-person strafe shooting, and that was Recore, but Recore wasn't very good. This is much better. I mentioned Darksiders previously. The combos in that game were good enough and nailed down most of what I expect in a character action game. Biomutant is a bit different though. It's more about dodging and doing neat moves, not complex ones like sandbagging the hell out of an enemy like in Devil May Cry. As you unlock more weapons, you can do more special moves, but Darksiders at least gave you a good amount of stuff to do out of the gate with your weapon that is pretty much standard in most character action games, like launching enemies in the air and dash stabs. And Biomutant doesn't really have any of that, at least at first. When I say Biomutant has thematic combat, you're going to see a lot of slowdown and pauses to do your combos and really stretch out the animations because they look visually interesting. There's a lot going on. It's like the Arkham games, except if Batman had more weapon and enemy variety and it wasn't just Simon Says. And the melee weapons you do unlock do add more to your abilities, but the guns are a bit lacking so far. You can kind of upgrade them, but it's more about stat boosts rather than completely changing the way a weapon works. Now, I mentioned story and morality choices. This is where the game can go downhill or uphill depending on who you are, and it might make or break the game for you. See, in a lot of games you gotta farm morality points to convince characters in the story to side with you, or to unlock more gameplay items, or progress the story further. You know, standard stuff. So usually the game kind of shows you what the moral paths do early on, so you have a good idea of where you're heading in the story. Now, not every moral choice needs to give you an immediate reaction. It can happen later on, but it would be nice to see something early on. Biomutant is weird. Doing moral side missions on the way to the next objective just leaves me with nothing, emptiness. These are the first few hours of the game, and they feel like side missions that you do 40 hours into another game, where you're just grinding points. Like, I liberated this area right here, got one moral point for saving this dude's life, and that's about it. Absolutely nothing else, not even a thank you or anything. It's worth noting the game doesn't have voice dialogue, it has narrated dialogue. The guy doing it is Kevin Briding, the Stanley Parable narrator. He's also credited for a lot of other games. He lends his voice here, and he does a pretty good job of immersing you into the world.
How can something as beautiful as this be dying? A plague is ruining the land, but the tree of life still stands. Question is, for how long? End is coming to the new world. The tribes stand divided, in need of someone strong enough to unite them, or bring them all down. This is a story with an unusual beginning. So, let's expect an unusual end.
And you'll be immersed whether you like it or not, because the game is loaded with flashback sequences and dialogue segments in the first 2 hours, constantly interrupting you. Thankfully, a lot of it does lead somewhere, and it helps with your motivation and fleshes out the characters and the world a bit. Thankfully, it's all skippable, and I did get more out of it than it did take away from the experience. I won't spoil anything, but it does set out what it tries to do, and it does succeed, at least for me, and that's to get you invested in the game. Even though it is a bit ham-fisted, forcing you out of the open world into these linear segments, it is still a nice build-up at the start to something better. A lot of other games, they would just say, like, oh, you're some random hero, or you have this, amnesia, whatever, and here you go, here's some boring combat, go play that for 30 hours, then maybe we'll make the story better. But here it's like, oh, okay, we got some backstory, it's building something up, it's not bad. Speaking of linearity, though, the game isn't open world like you'd think, at least not for me yet. This is one of those games that stuffs in a lot of linearity in your first 2 or 3 hours, and while it does get better as you play, I particularly like the tribe missions with the objectives and level variety. It does leave you wanting more. I want to explore this world, and when I can, there's very little to actually explore. There's not a whole lot of interesting items. The side monsters that I've been fighting don't really drop anything. It's just not very good on the progression level where you're going off the beaten path and doing stuff and you're not feeling like you're being rewarded for it. So overall, Biomutant is a neat game. I enjoy it. I'm going to recommend it, but cautiously. I'm not far enough into it to really judge where most of it is headed. Again, this is not a review. These are just my quick thoughts. So I'm going to say buy it on sale and look at what others are saying. The game is doing pretty poorly critically, and I can see why. The game is asking for $50, and it doesn't have nearly the same level of polish and depth that other games of its kind have. So I am recommending it, but not at full price. You can grab this game cheaper on third-party key sites right now, actually, closer to $40. But that's pretty much it for me, guys. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments below. I'll see you next time. I'm out.